So here's a question for you. How does a former colony end up having one of the warmest relationships anywhere in the world with its former colonizer? It sounds impossible, right? Well, that's the complex and honestly pretty surprising story of Taiwan and Japan.
Let's start in 2011. A massive, devastating earthquake and tsunami hit Japan. The world rushes to help, but one place, in particular, donates over 20 billion yen. We're talking roughly 200 million US dollars. That was more than any other country on the entire planet.
And yeah, you guessed it, that donor was Taiwan. This absolutely astonishing act of generosity came from an island that, for 50 long years, was a colony of Japan.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How did this happen? To really understand this completely unique friendship, we have to rewind the clock. We need to see what Taiwan was like before the Japanese ever even set foot on the island. Okay, so for more than 200 years, Taiwan was technically part of China's Qing dynasty. But, being part of the empire didn't mean it was getting a lot of love from the imperial court. It was pretty much the opposite.
So it's really crucial to get this starting point. This wasn't some thriving, well-run province. Officials called it a ball of mud. There was a saying that you'd get a small rebellion every 3 years and a big one every 5. There were no modern railways, no real ports, terrible sanitation. Almost everyone was illiterate. It was this chaotic frontier that its rulers in Beijing basically ignored. And that context, well, that's the key to understanding everything that came next.
All right, fast forward to 1895. After a war with China, Taiwan is handed over to Japan. And this kicks off 50 years of colonial rule that would totally transform the island, but in two profoundly different and often totally contradictory ways. And this really captures that double-edged sword. On one side, you've got the iron fist. We're talking brutal suppression of anyone who resisted, and a real push to force Japanese culture on everyone. But on the other side, you've got this modernizing hand, which brought in all this infrastructure and public services that, literally laid the groundwork for the modern Taiwan we see today. And look, these weren't small tweaks. Just think about what this timeline really represents. The first modern hospitals, public schools for everyone, a railway connecting the entire island. These are fundamental, life-altering shifts. And that last point, average life expectancy jumped by 15 years. That's incredible. Now, if one single person embodies this whole complex legacy, it's a Japanese engineer named Yoichi Hata. And his story is just wow. So Hata's project didn't just transform a massive dry patch of land into fertile farmland, it transformed relationships. In an era of strict colonial hierarchy, he insisted on equal pay for his Taiwanese and Japanese workers. That act of humanity, it went so far beyond just incredible engineering, and that's why he's still honored today. It's this super rare case of a colonizer being genuinely, truly revered by the colonized.
But all this modernization came at a huge cost to people's identity. Especially in the later years of their rule, the Japanese really pushed a policy of forced assimilation. They tried to erase Taiwanese culture, ban local languages, and it created this profound sense of division for people, like they were living a double life.
Okay, now let's jump ahead to 1945. World War II is over, Japan has surrendered, and Taiwan is handed over to the Republic of China, which was led by the Nationalist Party, the KMT. And for a lot of Taiwanese, this was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, a return to the motherland. But that joy, it was incredibly short-lived. The arriving KMT officials and their troops were seen by so many Taiwanese as corrupt, undisciplined, and just plain exploitative. The island very quickly plunged into total economic collapse and social chaos. So this right here is probably the most crucial point in the whole story. The immediate, chaotic, and painful experience of this new KMT rule started to reframe the memory of the last 50 years. Suddenly, the Japanese era, which, yes, was oppressive, started to look orderly and functional by comparison. That contrast is the absolute key to everything. All that tension finally just exploded on February 28, 1947. It started with a small argument over untaxed cigarettes, but it spiraled into an island-wide uprising against KMT rule. The response was swift, and it was horrifically brutal. Reinforcements came from the mainland and began this systematic crackdown, specifically targeting and executing thousands of Taiwan's best and brightest, its doctors, its lawyers, its intellectuals. And that massacre was just the beginning. It was followed by nearly 4 decades of martial law, known as the White Terror. It was a period that silenced all discussion of what happened, and it cemented this deep, deep trauma and distrust of the government that would last for generations.
So, when martial law finally ended in 1987, all of these complicated memories of the Japanese era, of the KMT's arrival, they all came rushing back to the surface and they began shaping the unique relationship that we see today.
I mean, today, Japan's influence is just woven into the very fabric of Taiwanese society. You can hear it in the language, where words like bento for a lunchbox are just normal. You can see it in social habits, like queuing up for things, and a real focus on punctuality. And of course, there's this deep and lasting love for Japanese pop culture. All of it creates this powerful sense of cultural familiarity.
And if you want to see that cultural connection in just raw numbers, look at this. Before the pandemic, nearly 5 million Taiwanese visited Japan in a single year. That's almost a quarter of the entire population. That is just a massive flow of people. And for the generation that actually lived through it all, the relationship is still this mix of really conflicting, powerful emotions. This quote just says it all. It's this feeling of connection to a place that was once your oppressor, but also in this strange, complicated way, it was a kind of home.
So this unusual friendship, it's not about ignoring the brutality of colonialism. It's not about forgetting. It's about how that 50-year history was fundamentally reinterpreted because of the even more traumatic events that came right after it.
At the end of the day, this whole story is just a powerful reminder that our view of the past isn't fixed in stone. It's constantly being shaped and reshaped by whatever it is that comes next.